Hello friend, welcome. My name is Lana, and today I'm going to talk about my life living in Korea as a child. My father was in the U.S. Army, and he met my mother in Korea. She's Korean, and I have 3 sisters and a brother who were all born in Korea. And because we traveled a lot, when my parents traveled a lot in the military, each one of my sisters and my brother was born in a different town. Seoul, Busan, Daegu, and I think there was one other town that one of my siblings was born at. And I was born in Yokohama, Japan. One of the reasons why I decided to make these videos is so I can chronicle my life for my grandsons. One of the things I regret is not talking to my parents enough about their lives. It wasn't until I was older and they had already passed away that I realized that they had a lot of stories and some interesting things that happened to them, a lot of things bad that they struggled with, and a lot of good things too. But my mother, for example, she had escaped the North Koreans, and her mother was almost 9 months pregnant at the time. She didn't have any brothers or sisters, and the ones that she did have, they died. I mean, that's a whole different story. And I wish I knew all the details of how she escaped. The only thing I do know is that she didn't want to leave her mother. Her mother was almost 9 months pregnant, and she did not want to leave her. But her mother, my grandmother, made her friends and the neighbors take her against her will so that she could survive. And that was the last time my mother has ever seen her. And I just wanted to know more about her journey. I knew a little bit about how she escaped and how she saw a lot of people being blown up and shot, and she eventually was rescued by Catholic missionaries. And again, I wish I knew more details about that. But ever since then, they took her in, they helped her, they taught her how to survive and what to do once she was on her own. And they taught her about the Catholic religion. And ever since then, she was so devoted to the Catholic Church. And then there's my father, who was an atheist. So growing up, that was really confusing. We were kind of mixed up. We just didn't know which way to go. But besides that, I still have some memories, and I noticed that some of my memories, the little details, I think my age, I'm forgetting some of the little details. So I'm trying to remember them so I can chronicle it. So someday when my grandsons are interested, they could watch my videos. And they won't have to wonder so much. But as I said, all my siblings were born in Korea. I was born in Yokohama, Japan, when my father was stationed there. And I have these vague memories, and they're not necessarily going to be in sequence. They're just like spots of memories. I do remember, because we moved around so much, we had stayed in this one place, and I don't know if it was an apartment. I don't know if I think it was a temporary place. And what I do remember is they didn't have bathrooms per se. If I had to go to the bathroom, we had to go out the door and walk down the hall, and there was an outhouse. And so all it was you had to squat. And there was 2 boards and newspapers. Back then, they used newspapers for toilet paper. And I remember I was always scared just looking down this deep hole and having to go to the bathroom. So that was one of my memories. And I do remember, I don't know exactly what they're called, but a man would carry this huge cart and clean out the poop. He had this huge poop scooper, and I don't know exactly how they did it. But we always knew when the poop scooper, because you can smell it. It was very strong smell, and it was pretty gross. And I do remember my aunts or my mother, they would take us to the marketplace. Oh, I just want to mention that we did move around a lot. Sometimes we lived on the base, and back then we didn't call it a base. We called it the compound. It wasn't until we moved to the US that it was called the base. So sometimes we lived on the compound, and sometimes we lived outside the compound. My father preferred to live outside the compound because he wanted to experience the Korean life, the Korean culture. He was fascinated with it. So many times he would build a house or rent a house, and the difference between the compound and Korean culture, just being outside of the compound, was so different. When you're on the base, it's just like living in the US. You go through the gates, and they have their barracks. They have a residential area for all the military soldiers. They had shopping, they had a movie theater, they had school. I went to school on the base. So it was just like living in the US. But as soon as you crossed out of there, it was Korea. And it was not that long after the war had ended, and there was a lot of destruction. Even I can remember some of the destruction. I remember going to the market, and I remember walking, and I saw this woman sitting on the floor, on the ground, completely dirty, full of rags, and she was nursing her baby, and she was completely exposed. And I remember feeling really bad for her. But there was a lot of that, and there was a lot of young Korean kids my age that would beg for food. A lot of them carried these burlap bags, and whenever they saw someone, they, especially an American, they would say, "Bap dun jua, bap dun jua." And what that means, bap is rice in Korea, but basically they're begging for food. And sometimes they would open up their sacks, and I would look in, and it was just a bunch of garbage food, as if you can imagine at a restaurant when someone's done eating, they throw it in the garbage. That's what it looked like, just a mess of food. And again, as a little child, I just felt really bad. And those memories are pretty much seared in my brain. I do remember my father, he had a driver, and he also had a pink Rambler. Yes, a pink Rambler. And many years later, we asked our dad, why do you have a pink Rambler? What's that all about? Why pink? You're in the military. It just seems like a kind of against the macho-ness of the military. And the way he explained it was that he knew that someday he would go back to the States. And he needed a car, and Koreans could not order a car from the US. But if you're an American living in Korea, you can order a car. It took a while, and you can special order it. And he knew these people who owned a wedding business, and he knew that he wanted to buy a car for the wedding, his wedding venues. That was just part of what he offered. So he decided, okay, I'm going to buy this Rambler. I'm going to buy a pink Rambler, and it's going to be shipped, and we'll use it for a few years, and then he'll sell it to this person who owns this wedding company. And he would get top dollar because apparently they paid a lot of money for an American car. So that's exactly what happened. I remember that pink Rambler everywhere. The driver would drive it, my father would drive it. We would hop into the pink Rambler, and sometimes the driver would go somewhere out in the Korean community and park somewhere, lock all the doors, and we would just sit in the car, and all of a sudden a ton of kids would run to the car, and it was a little bit intimidating. These kids just looking at us through the window, and I think probably they were attracted by the car. So that's just one memory I have, nothing important. One of the things that my mother did, because she was so devoted to the Catholic Church, was there was a lot of orphanages in Korea, and there was this one that she had a connection with, and every now and again she would have this big party and invite all the orphans to come over and eat food and eat cake, and just to give back a little bit. It just made me think about how generous my mother was and how devoted she was and how passionate she felt about being rescued by Catholic missionaries. Another memory that I have was television. At the time, I believe there was only two channels. There was a Korean channel and there was an American channel, and it was run by the Army military. And in fact, my father had worked at the TV station for a while. I'm not sure how long, I was just a little kid. But TV, it started, it wasn't 24 hours like it is today with a million different stations. It was just the two, and it would start at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they would show cartoons, and that's the only thing I really remember are the cartoons. And then about 5:30, they would have the news. They would have local news, and it was always a man in uniform that told the news. And then at 6 o'clock, Walter Cronkite would come on and do his news. And my father loved Walter Cronkite. I remember him watching Walter Cronkite every single night. And then later on, it would have TV shows like Gunsmoke, Dick Van Dyke, just shows like that. And I don't think any of us were really into TV, probably because it wasn't the most important thing and only came on a few hours a day. And then either at 11 o'clock or at 12 o'clock midnight, it would shut off, and then you would get that screen, that black and white screen with the circle on it. Do you remember those? And the next day, it wouldn't start until 3 o'clock. However, on the weekends, it would start a little bit earlier. I don't know what time, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, and they would just play cartoons for hours. That was fun. They would have Bugs Bunny, the Roadrunner. My dad loved the Roadrunner. Even my dad would watch that. And then probably later on throughout the day, maybe movies, and then maybe the news, and just some basic American TV shows. One of the things that I absolutely hated were bathhouses. And I only think my mother took us there a few times in between moving or waiting for a house to be built. My dad did design and build a house in Korea. And so we had nowhere to take a bath, I guess. And my mom would take us and my brother and my sisters, sometimes it was my aunts, and they had bathhouses. There was one for women and one for men. They did not mix the two, except my brother had to come with the women. He hated that, so his experience was probably even worse than mine. But sometimes my brother and I, we hated it so much that we would sneak off and hide, and then we'd get in big trouble. But what we would do is we would go in. They had this huge, I guess it's like a hot tub with no jets, this huge bathtub, and we would have to just soak until my mom was ready for us. And then what she did was she got a washcloth, and she called it take off skin. Basically, it means she exfoliated us, which I hated her scrubbing. And then once she was done, she would lather us all up and rinse us off, and then we could go back, because you could not go into the bathtub with soap on you, or you couldn't go in the bathtub to wash your hair. They had a different section for that. I hated the bathhouses. Thank goodness we didn't have to do that all the time. And my sister, my brothers, and I, we went to school on the base. I don't have a whole lot of memories about that. The only thing I do remember is I didn't do well in school. But the one thing that the teacher always liked about me is that I was very artistic. I kind of would just escape into my own little world and just draw and color. And apparently I had some talent. And that's all I really remember. I remember going to the movies. I remember the driver taking us to school and picking us up. But that's pretty much all the memories that I have. I was very young. And that's pretty much all I can remember. There's other little things here and there, but they're not really that important. I'd love to know, what was your favorite memory as a child? And did you live abroad? Or did you do something interesting in your childhood? Did your parents have interesting jobs? I'd love to know. Thank you for watching. Bye.